Dr. Mary Neal's story is one that seems almost too incredible to believe. It's the kind of account that bridges the gap between the physical and spiritual worlds, challenging the boundaries of what we understand about life, death, and what might lie beyond. Dr. Neal, an accomplished orthopedic surgeon and a highly respected member of the medical community, had no reason to fabricate a tale of this nature. Her journey from the everyday realities of medical science to the profound, otherworldly experience she claims to have had makes this story both compelling and mystifying. It all began in the late 1990s during a kayaking trip to Chile. Dr. Neal and her friends were seeking adventure and the thrill of navigating the wild waters of South America. As an experienced kayaker, she was confident in her abilities. But on one fateful day, the river had other plans. While attempting to navigate a particularly dangerous section of the river, her kayak became trapped underwater. The force of the water held her down, pinning her against the rocks beneath the surface for more than 15 minutes. Dr. Neal was submerged, unable to breathe, and, according to all medical logic, far beyond the point of resuscitation. Her friends tried desperately to free her, knowing full well that her chances of survival were slim. In those intense moments of panic and struggle, they had already begun to resign themselves to the grim reality that she might not make it. Eventually, they managed to pull her lifeless body from the water, but by then, it seemed far too late. Her body was unresponsive, cold, and without any sign of life. By all accounts, she was dead. Yet, this is where her story truly begins. According to Dr. Neal, the moments that followed were not filled with darkness or nothingness, as many might imagine death to be. Instead, she recalls a vivid, intense experience that she describes as more real than anything she had ever felt before. She found herself in an entirely different realm, surrounded by a brilliant, pure light. This light, as she later explained, was not merely an illumination but a presence of being. It was filled with warmth, love, and peace that she could not fully articulate. There were no words spoken, yet she understood everything on a deeper level through what she describes as an immediate, all-encompassing knowing. It was as if the very essence of love and understanding had enveloped her. In this place, Dr. Neal encountered what she interpreted as angels. She felt their presence around her, guiding her, comforting her, and filling her with an indescribable sense of peace. There was no fear, no pain, just a profound feeling of safety and love. These beings, she said, were luminous and emanated a kind of love she had never experienced before. As she observed them, she realized they were preparing her for a meeting with an even greater presence, what she came to understand as God. Dr. Neal felt as though time did not exist in this place. She could see the river below her and the people struggling to resuscitate her, but she no longer felt any connection to her physical body. It was as if she had stepped out of her earthly form and was now part of something far greater. The beings of light communicated to her that it was not yet her time, that she had more work to do on earth, and that she must return. At that moment, she did not want to leave. The overwhelming peace and love were unlike anything she had ever experienced, and the thought of returning to the pain of her earthly body was almost unbearable. When she was finally resuscitated and brought back to life, it was nothing short of a miracle. Her friends, paramedics, and doctors all agreed that her survival was against all odds. Medical professionals who reviewed her case could not explain how she had survived without brain damage after being submerged for such a prolonged period. The experience left her with a profound sense of awe, a deep gratitude for life, and a certainty that she had been given a glimpse of the afterlife. Initially, Dr. Neal shared her experience with close family and friends. It wasn't until years later that she decided to write her book, To Heaven and Back *, where she detailed her near-death experience. The book became a bestseller, touching the lives of many who had their own questions about life after death. However, there was one aspect of her experience that she kept secret for a long time, something she didn't include in her book. It was a prophetic vision she had received about the future of the United States, involving a controversial political figure. In the years following her return from the brink of death, Dr. Neal felt a deep spiritual connection that seemed to grow stronger as she continued her medical practice and spoke about her near-death experience. It wasn't until 2017, after the unexpected election of Donald Trump as President of the United States, that she felt compelled to reveal this hidden part of her vision. During public lectures and private interviews, she began to share what she had seen during her time on the other side, a glimpse of future events that she believed were unfolding before her eyes. In her vision, Dr. Neal found herself in the same heavenly place she had experienced during her near-death experience. The light that she identified as God was present once again, surrounding her with an indescribable sense of love and wisdom. However, this time there was a sense of urgency, a message that needed to be conveyed. She was shown images of a turbulent and chaotic future for the United States, a period of great upheaval and division. Amidst this turmoil, she saw the rise of a leader, a figure who was unexpected and unanticipated. In her vision, Dr. Mary Neal found herself once again enveloped in the same brilliant light that she had come to identify as the presence of God. This light, she described, was not just illumination but a profound and loving presence that filled her with peace and understanding. As she stood in this place of divine love, she was shown images that were both vivid and enigmatic, yet their impression was undeniable. She saw a figure who would act as both a disruptor and an instrument, someone destined to shake up the existing political order and bring long-hidden truths to the surface. The images were not clear in every detail, but the sense of this person's role was deeply imprinted on her. It wasn't until after the 2016 election of Donald Trump that Dr. Neal began to realize that this figure matched the vision she had seen. The leader she had witnessed was not explicitly named, but the traits and actions she observed in her vision closely aligned with Trump's presidency. Dr. Neal described feeling conflicted about revealing this part of her experience. She was acutely aware of Trump's polarizing nature as a political figure and anticipated that her claims would be met with skepticism, criticism, and even anger. Nevertheless, she believed that she had been given this message for a reason and that it was her responsibility to share it. In her vision, God had shown her that the disruption caused by this leader was part of a divine plan, a necessary phase to expose the corruption and hidden issues festering within society. Dr. Neal believed this leader was being used as an instrument of God, a tool for divine intervention. She emphasized that this was not about endorsing a political figure but about understanding a larger spiritual narrative unfolding in the world. To her, this period was a test for the American people, a time of trials meant to challenge their moral and spiritual values. She viewed this time as one of purification and renewal, where the nation would be forced to confront its deeper issues and make a pivotal choice: to continue down a path of division or to embrace truth and justice. The most striking part of her vision, according to Dr. Neal, was the message that this leader would be unlike anyone people expected. It was a powerful reminder, she said, that God's ways are not our ways. The plan she witnessed was far beyond human understanding, and she felt it was a call for humility and faith in the midst of uncertainty. As Dr. Neal began to share this vision publicly, it became a point of intense discussion and debate. People interpreted her message in vastly different ways, reflecting the deep divisions in how individuals viewed both her insights and Trump's role in this divine scenario. Her story, blending profound spiritual insights with a controversial interpretation of contemporary politics, offered a glimpse into the unknown. It invited people to consider the possibility of a higher purpose behind even the most unexpected events in the world. In the years following her near-death experience, Dr. Neal wrestled with an internal conflict. Most of her story, as told in her best-selling book To Heaven and Back *, focused on the awe-inspiring beauty and peace she experienced in the afterlife. However, this other part of her vision felt distinctly different. It was more unsettling, more urgent, and she hesitated to share it for fear of misunderstanding or backlash. Dr. Neal knew that what she had seen and felt during her moments in heaven could profoundly affect how people perceived her, and she wasn't sure she was ready for the consequences of revealing this hidden message. But as the political landscape in the United States began to shift dramatically in 2016, Dr. Neal felt an undeniable urge to revisit her vision. She began to understand that the images and messages she had received during her encounter with the divine were not just abstract symbols but were tied to real-world events now unfolding before her eyes. It was as if she had been given a preview of a critical turning point for America. This realization left her both awestruck and deeply anxious. She understood that she could no longer keep this part of her experience hidden. As she shared more about this vision, Dr. Neal explained that the divine light she encountered was filled with love and wisdom, but it also carried a sense of urgency. The vision was not simply about the leader she had seen but also about the collective response of the people. She emphasized that this moment in history was an opportunity for transformation, a chance for individuals and the nation as a whole to choose a path of renewal and integrity. For Dr. Neal, this vision became a call to action, not just for herself but for all who heard her story. It was an invitation to reflect on deeper spiritual truths and to confront the challenges of the times with faith, humility, and a commitment to justice. The visual phenomenon Dr. Mary Neal experienced was not just an image, it was a living, breathing entity filled with a wisdom and love so profound that it transcended anything she could compare to on earth. It communicated with her not through words or speech but through a deep inner knowing. She received entire thoughts and ideas in an instant, a kind of knowledge transfer that bypassed any need for verbal language. During this exchange, she was shown a series of images and scenarios depicting the future of the United States. The scenes were filled with turmoil and chaos. She saw crowds of people clashing in the streets, engaged in intense arguments, and a palpable sense of division cutting through the very fabric of society. The vision was overwhelming, filled with anxiety and unrest, contrasting starkly with the peaceful, loving environment she had first experienced during her near-death encounter. These scenes seemed to suggest a coming period of upheaval, where the usual order of things would be disrupted in unsettling ways. Amidst this chaos, she saw a figure rise to prominence, a leader who seemed out of place, someone who did not fit the mold of a typical politician or statesman. This figure appeared surrounded by a swirl of controversy and confusion, yet there was something distinctive about him that set him apart. Dr. Neal described how this figure stood firm against a backdrop of chaos, almost as if he were a lightning rod for the division spreading across the nation. She sensed a powerful energy around this individual, something that seemed to repel and attract people in equal measure. It wasn't until the election of Donald Trump that she felt she could finally identify this leader. She described the figure she had seen as a disruptor, someone not chosen by typical means but placed in this position by a force far greater than human understanding. The message she received was clear. This leader had been sent as an instrument of change, a tool meant to disrupt the existing status quo and expose hidden truths. It was not a message of endorsement but rather a revelation of purpose. According to her vision, this disruption was necessary to shake the foundations of the political system, bringing to light corruption and deceit long buried beneath the surface. She likened the figure's role to that of a wrecking ball, a force that might appear destructive on the surface but was actually paving the way for something new and better. The divine message conveyed to her was that this disruption was part of a larger divine plan, intended to cleanse and purify the nation. This process, she explained, was not meant to be easy or comfortable. Instead, it was depicted as a necessary period of upheaval, forcing people to confront difficult truths about their society and themselves. Dr. Neal felt that God was using this leader as a testing instrument, not for the leader's sake, but for the sake of the American people. The period of disruption was shown to her as a time of trial, a test of the nation's spiritual and moral fiber. It was as if the country was being asked to look into a mirror and decide whether to choose the path of truth, justice, and righteousness or to continue down a path of deception and division. The message was deeply spiritual, urging collective introspection and a call to higher moral standards. What struck Dr. Neal most was the unexpected nature of this leader. In her vision, she sensed the confusion and disbelief among the people, many of whom could not understand why such a figure had risen to power. It was almost as if the leader's rise was a cosmic joke, a twist of fate that defied all conventional expectations. Yet, the underlying message she received was that God often works in mysterious ways, beyond human comprehension. The leader's unexpected nature, she believed, was itself a sign of something deeper at play. It was a reminder that divine plans do not always align with human preferences or logic. She interpreted this aspect of her vision as a profound spiritual lesson. Humans often fail to recognize the ways in which God's plan unfolds, especially when it takes forms that are unfamiliar or uncomfortable. The divine plan she witnessed was not meant to be easily understood or accepted. It was meant to challenge people, to shake them out of their complacency, and to force them to confront their own biases and preconceptions. The warning she received was not just about political turmoil. It was about a deeper spiritual test for the nation as a whole. Dr. Neal sensed that the coming years would be filled with trials and tribulations, not only in the political realm but also in the hearts and minds of individuals. She was shown that this period of division and conflict would resemble a refining fire, burning away impurities and bringing about a form of spiritual renewal. It was to be a time of great testing, a decisive moment that would reveal the true character of the nation. Dr. Neal described seeing the hands of God moving across the landscape of the United States, orchestrating events in a way that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. It served as a stark reminder of the immense power and wisdom of the divine, a force that operates beyond the limits of human perception. Despite the CHAO's and uncertainty depicted in her vision, there was also a sense of purpose behind it. She felt these events were ultimately leading toward a greater good, a spiritual awakening that could only be realized once the storm had passed. For Dr. Neal, the most profound takeaway from this part of her vision was the reminder of God's ultimate sovereignty and the call for faith amid confusion. She believed that the message was not about any one political figure but about the process of spiritual growth and purification to which the nation was being called. It was a test not of political allegiance, but of the soul. A chance for people to choose a path of higher truth and integrity, even when that path seemed counterintuitive or uncomfortable. Her message was a call to the American people to look beyond the surface, to see the deeper spiritual narrative at play, and to trust that even in the midst of CHAO's, a divine plan was unfolding. This plan, she believed, was meant to guide humanity toward a greater understanding and connection with the divine. For Dr. Mary Neal, her near-death experience was not just a fleeting moment of spiritual enlightenment. It was a transformative encounter that reshaped her entire understanding of faith, destiny, and the nature of divine intervention. As an accomplished orthopedic surgeon, she had spent her career grounded in the physical sciences, relying on logic, evidence, and the tangible aspects of healing the human body. But her profound experience on the other side opened her eyes to a deeper spiritual reality that went far beyond her previous beliefs. Her faith, while strong before her accident, took on an entirely new dimension after her vision of heaven and her encounter with what she could only describe as the presence of God. Dr. Neal's interpretation of her vision, particularly the parts that seemed to relate directly to Donald Trump, was deeply rooted in her Christian beliefs. It wasn't just about political figures or future events. It was about understanding a divine plan that she felt was unfolding before her eyes. Her background as a Christian gave her a specific framework to interpret what she had seen. She felt that God had shown her these images not as a prophecy in the traditional sense but as a revelation of a larger spiritual process. In her view, the vision demonstrated how God often uses unexpected means and people to fulfill divine purposes. Her Christian faith provided the lens through which she saw Trump's rise to power as part of a greater divine narrative. Dr. Neal emphasized that her vision was not about portraying Trump as a holy or infallible figure but as a vessel and instrument used by God to bring about necessary change. She believed the leader she saw in her vision was chosen precisely because he was outside the conventional political establishment. His very nature as a disruptor, someone polarizing and unpredictable, was what made him suitable for the role she believed God had intended. She likened Trump's rise to biblical stories where God chose unlikely individuals to lead and fulfill his plan. Characters like Moses, who doubted his own abilities, or King David, an unexpected choice among his brothers, served as examples of how divine selection does not always align with human expectations. For Dr. Neal, Trump was a modern parallel to these figures, not necessarily because of his virtues or morality, but because of the role he played in shaking up the established order. Dr. Neal's interpretation of the vision was both comforting and challenging for her. On one hand, it reinforced her belief in a higher purpose at work, even amid turmoil and division. On the other hand, it forced her to confront the reality that this period of disruption and conflict would not be easy for anyone. She saw it as a time of spiritual testing, a purification process that would reveal the true nature of people's hearts. She felt that the message she received was a call for humility, a willingness to trust in God's plan, even when it seemed counterintuitive or distressing. Dr. Neal knew that sharing her interpretation of the vision would be controversial. The idea that Trump, a figure as polarizing and divisive as any in recent American history, could be seen as part of a divine plan was bound to provoke strong reactions. When Dr. Neal began to speak openly about this aspect of her near-death experience in lectures and interviews, the responses were mixed. In religious circles, particularly among those who saw Trump as a kind of unlikely savior, her revelations were met with validation and support. Many viewed her story as confirmation of their belief that God was using Trump as a tool to bring about necessary changes, challenging the corrupt systems that had become entrenched over time. For these believers, Dr. Neal's account was a powerful affirmation of their faith that God is actively involved in the affairs of the world. It gave them a sense of comfort, believing that the CHAO's and conflict they were witnessing were part of a larger divine purpose. Some saw her vision as a sign that America was undergoing a kind of spiritual awakening, a painful but necessary process that would ultimately lead to renewal and healing. However, not everyone was receptive to her message. Many were skeptical, even outright dismissive, of her claims. Critics argued that her visions were influenced by her own political and religious beliefs, suggesting that she had projected her personal preferences onto the images she had seen during her near-death experience. They pointed out that near-death experiences are highly subjective and often reflect the cultural and personal background of the person experiencing them. In this light, they questioned whether her vision of Trump as a divinely chosen disruptor was more a reflection of her own biases than a genuine spiritual revelation. The criticism didn't stop there. Some individuals, including those who had been inspired by her earlier descriptions of heaven and her experience of divine love, felt uncomfortable with the political turn her story had taken. They believed that mixing politics with spiritual visions could dilute the purity of her message and alienate people who might otherwise have found solace in her account. This pushback made Dr. Neal even more aware of the controversial nature of her revelations, but she felt compelled to share them anyway. She believed it was part of her responsibility to convey the full extent of what she had seen and experienced, regardless of the backlash. Dr. Neal's story became a lightning rod for discussions about the role of faith in interpreting current events and the ways in which people look for spiritual explanations in times of uncertainty. Her account highlighted the deep divide in how people perceive the intersection of religion and politics. For some, her vision was a sign of hope, a reassurance that there is a higher power guiding the events of the world. For others, it was a troubling example of how personal beliefs can shape the interpretation of spiritual experiences, raising questions about the reliability and objectivity of such visions. Despite the mixed reactions, Dr. Neal remained steadfast in her conviction that she had been shown a glimpse of a divine plan. She understood that not everyone would agree with her interpretation, but she felt it was important to share her story nonetheless. In her view, the vision was a reminder that God's ways are often mysterious and that His plans do not always align with human expectations. It was a call for people to look beyond the surface, to seek a deeper spiritual understanding of the events unfolding in their world. Reflecting on her near-death experience and the visions she received, Dr. Neal saw a message that was ultimately one of hope, even if it was wrapped in a period of turmoil and uncertainty. She believed the CHAO's she had witnessed was not the end of the story but rather a necessary step in a process of spiritual awakening. It was a time of testing, a moment of choice for the nation and its people. She felt that God was calling people to rise above their differences, to embrace a higher truth, and to come together in a spirit of unity and love. Dr. Neal's final reflections on her experience were filled with a sense of awe and humility. She admitted that she did not have all the answers and that much of what she had seen remained a mystery even to her. However, she felt the message she had received was clear: that there is a divine plan at work, one that is guiding the events of the world toward a greater good, even if it is difficult for us to see or understand in the moment. Her story, she hoped, would serve as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is a light shining through a divine hand at work leading us toward a future filled with possibilities we cannot yet imagine. In the end, Dr. Neal's journey was not just about a personal encounter with the afterlife but about the lessons she brought back with her. Lessons of faith, trust, and the importance of looking beyond our immediate circumstances to see the bigger picture. Her vision, whether seen as a literal prophecy or a symbolic representation of her own beliefs, offered a powerful message that there is always hope, even in the midst of chaos, and that we are all part of a much larger story, one being guided by a wisdom far greater than our own.